All right. Hello. Good day. Welcome back. Today, I want to have a little bit of a presentation on why green energy isn't really green. It's a reasonable explanation about green energy and why it's not really as environmentally friendly as always claimed. So, solar and wind have long been hailed as the solution to all environmental issues, and they're just not. So, the thing about solar and wind is, like every other tool of power generation, it is simply a means to generate electrical current. And electrical currents can be measured in a variety of ways. One of the normal ways to do is like kilowatt, um, megawatt, and so on and so forth. In general, the main issues with solar and wind, I want to discuss a little bit. Also, some of their benefits, and why, um, even though they get a lot of flack from both sides, conservative people will claim like a solar panel is essentially a very expensive roof tile. Liberal people will claim it's the solution to everything, and it's not. Any means of energy generation is simply a tool that can be used. So, solar and wind are pretty effective tools for power generation. Solar is very reliable during the day, or generally whenever there is sunlight to be absorbed by the panel in order to get converted into electricity. You can use one of the solar fields as pictured, where you use a bunch of reflective mirrors to melt salt, which then can be stored because the salt is hot. You can run water through it, and then the water can turn into steam, which generates electricity, which is more reliable than the traditional solar panel system, which is why I'm a big fan of its usage, which is why I put the picture up here. Solar and wind can be fairly affordable, especially in the modern era. We have all this technology. It's not very expensive to get a solar panel or build a windmill for that matter. And you can use them to generate electricity for your house or your business. But like all other tools, you have to think about their implementation and their use pretty carefully to see if they actually really suit your needs or the needs of the general public in general, especially with the poor dual use of solar panels, in my opinion, where they put these solar farms that are solar panels in the middle of nowhere, and then there's just tons of them. Whereas almost every roof in the world doesn't have solar panels. Almost every road in every city in every country, the roads aren't covered by solar panels. The same for parking lots. Like parking lots are, especially public ones, like let's say for a Walmart or a supermarket or just a parking like a regular parking lot in a shopping area. If you cover the entirety of the street with solar panels, number one, you create areas with shade. So when you create these areas with shade, obviously cars might not need to run their AC, which means they can run more fuel efficiently. Um, when you get into your car, it's going to be a nicer temperature. You don't need to immediately turn on the AC or roll down your windows. You can just get in and drive off. It helps with visibility because if there's solar panels above parking lots and roads, the sun can't shine in your eyes, allowing you to see better. Um, Another thing is, if sunlight doesn't touch the roads and they actually don't warm up that much, you don't have to worry about the road expanding and shrinking and expanding and shrinking and causing things like tears. So in terms of reliability, it's also a good thing for roads to have and parking lots in general. Um, Solar is especially reliable in warmer regions. Generally, it's because you have more sunlight during the day, and just because there is more sunlight, less things like rain, cloudy weather that can obscure sunlight and reduce the energy generation of a panel. So solar and wind are also some of the safest ways to generate energy in the sense that for the running of a solar panel, if the solar panel gets damaged, it doesn't affect you. Like it might affect you somewhat financially, but also the chances of you being hurt by, let's say, a solar panel catching fire are pretty much zero, because generally solar panels aren't where you are, and even if you have solar panels on your roof, um, and they by some miracle catch fire, usually by the time the fire gets into your house, you have a smoke detector, probably. So that's gonna go off, and then you wake up, and you know you can exit your house safely. So same with wind. Once a windmill is built, aside from whenever it needs maintenance, um, generally windmills don't fall over. Uh, and they don't fall over in the middle of a city and hurt people. They don't explode. Uh, very basic things, but they're essentially the chances of being hurt physically by solar or wind are zero. So it's probably one of the most safest ways to generate power. Also, whenever they generate power, they don't produce any waste. Like a windmill, once it's built, or a solar panel, once it's built, um, for the generation of energy, no waste, which is pretty good, especially if you want to get to if you want to have a better climate, or if climate change is really the issue that people make it out to be. So, oh wait, yep, this one. A long tradition for wind power. So, wind, unlike solar, has had a more tried and true history. Windmills were actually used by a variety of nations for things like water pumping, making sure things like grain fields don't get too soggy and wet so it doesn't grow. They were also often used for grain milling, which in the modern era we have electric grain mills. But back in the olden days, you would use grindstones, and the grindstones would grind the grains, and then they would produce flour, which is why millers, as a historical profession, were always hated, because people were claiming millers were putting things like sawdust in the flour, and like diluting the flour for, let's say, poorer people so they could pocket more money. But generally, I think this is probably like a little bit of a stereotypical misconception, and I think historically windmills and millers have fulfilled their role in the pre-industrial era pretty admirably. Obviously, because we're here and our ancestors were there, so they probably had access to the bread, or at least the flour that the millers were able to provide, and probably able to consume it and grow and thrive. So that says a lot about the average quality of the flour that they were producing, because at least it was substantial enough for them to provide enough bread for everyone. So without windmills, many European farms would have not have had access to flour used for the making of a variety of staple foods. That's meant to be staple, but whatever. But it's true. We need flour. Um, Maybe not as much anymore nowadays, but back in the olden days, flour was like the main source of food for most people. Flour, and I think a variety of things like roots and nuts and berries, and also meat occasionally. Um, Although traditionally it's been seen as more of a nobleman's food. So reliability, windmills have generally throughout time performed their duties admirably. So this is true, 100% fact. Like windmills in the olden days, they pumped water and they did it pretty good, and they grind the grain milling stones, and it was doing it pretty good. And, there was probably also some other applications. I'm not too sure if it was used in the production of fabrics, but there's probably some example of the windmill doing something else than grain milling or water pumping out there that I just don't know about. I'm not a professional historian, more an amateur with a passion for all of this kind of thing. Um, so on to the next one. So major, often discussed drawbacks for solar. So solar does work when it's day, but does not work when at night. This should probably be a given. Um, they work by the principle of sunlight. So no sunlight, no power. The easy as that. If you don't understand that, then please buy yourself a brain. Solar power cannot easily be stored, and it's often quite expensive. This is also true, and not necessarily maybe a single solar panel, but in order to get the entire get up from the electrics to the storage to the solar panels and the installation itself, um, it's all effort. It's all effort, and generally it tends to cost money because most people don't really fuck with their electrics by themselves. They have an electrician do it. So solar power does not produce waste itself. During the generation of its energy and during its lifespan, the solar panel itself does not generate any waste. But the solar panels generally have a lifespan of between of plus minus 30 years, something like that. Some go a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter. Some might be, really robust and work for like maybe 100 years. But at some point, the downside of solar panels is at some point they always break, they get dirty, something happens to them. It's rendered inoperable. And once that happens, the solar panel needs to be replaced. And when it gets replaced, it gets thrown on the trash heap like pretty much all other forms of electronic garbage and waste that is currently polluting the earth probably more than carbon dioxide is. I'm really big on, because that's a thing a lot of liberals refuse to talk about in relationship to the environment. I'm a big fan of cleaning up the actual environment, as in the garbage that's actually in it, um, due to humans not really being thrifty and caring too much about their possessions anymore, because we've become really disconnected from everything we own and all the effort it takes to produce these things. Solar panels are not that powerful. So, for instance, with a fuel power plant, you can scale your energy demand at need. So you can burn more fuel, have it run faster to produce more electricity on demand. A solar panel, on average, will produce about I think 9 kilowatts, per day or something, which is not really that much. Um, at least that's what's going on with my setup. I think I have more than one panel, but anyway, generally they don't really produce that much energy, and you can't really scale the energy production of solar panels without adding more panels, which is very different for things like nuclear, geothermal, even wind to a certain extent, um, and nuclear. You can scale solar energy. You just cannot. Once the solar panel's there, it will generate small amount of electrical current, but in no way it's really feasible to have it be scalable. And yeah, if we would cover the entire Earth, like some people like Elon Musk suggests, and we capture all the energy of the sun, we could probably power humanity. But do you really want to live with this type of an outcome? Because you have to understand what they're trying to tell you is that way solar panels would consume the Earth. Like the Earth would be covered with them in order to maximize the amount of energy we can capture. And do you really want to live in a world where everything you see is solar panel? Because that kind of low key means the trees and most plants and all that stuff has got to go. Um, so besides from solar panels not being that powerful, I feel their use is better served as power reduction means. So during the day is usually when most energy gets used. And if you make sure a lot of houses have solar panels, a lot of apartment buildings, a lot of industrial buildings, roads, parking lots, like I mentioned before, and you really go about using solar panels in a dual space use and go with the salt plant, because the salt plant, you can actually store the energy in the form of melted salt. Um, if you actually use those solar panels then for reduction of need to the power grid, then you can use other forms of electricity that are more on demand, where you can choose whether you wanted to generate 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or however many megawatts you need, which is a far better use of thinking about the energy system. And that way you can, when you're upgrading the power lines, you can upgrade it in stages, so it doesn't become extremely expensive immediately, like all of a sudden, as is a lot of things that are happening now in nations that are going green. So major drawbacks: wind. So windmills, though less resource intensive than solar panels, in terms of materials required necessarily to build them. Solar panels, like they do require a lot of mining and refining in order to get built. Whereas a windmill is just steel, and steel is really easy to make and extremely cheap, specifically for that reason, and also because we make tons of it. Windmills also tend to have a lifespan of around plus minus 30 years, but um, there is windmill designs that last way longer, and it's an indicator. So a well-maintained windmill is obviously going to have a longer lifespan than windmills that are popped down and not cared about. Continual maintenance, unlike solar, windmills are mechanical, so you can't really not maintain them. They need a constant, steady supply of maintenance, with people that know what they're doing in order to make sure all the mechanisms operate effectively. Windmills do create noise pollution, so people that live near it will hear a constant hum. Um, and also at some point going on the trash heap. True, although it's just going to be steel, so it's a bit easier to recycle than solar panels. So in that sense, I'm kind of in favor of them. Windmills are also not space efficient and really don't produce that much power for the space. Geothermal energy is a reliable, clean source. Oh wait, yeah. So those are the big drawbacks of wind. Um, yeah, all right, I covered all my bases. Um, Also, windmills, besides not being space efficient, I also think like sometimes they can look nice, but generally when they're all bunched together like this, like kind of looks ugly, bro. Like they should think better about, I don't know, dressing the windmills or something. So geothermal energy. This is probably one of my favorite, more modern forms of energy because it's quite the interesting form of energy, and I really, really enjoy it. The workings of it. So how geothermal energy works is generally um, either they put it over geothermal hot springs already, so there's already steam just simply coming from the earth that then you can use to spin turbines, which is like a really clean, compact way of generating energy because there's steam coming out of the earth already. Don't need to do nothing. You built a geothermal power plant so you can capture the steam. You funnel it, you put it into a turbine, turbine spins, constant current. Also, you can slow down a turbine. So the energy is scalable in a way. Obviously, it does depend on steam input, or there's a second type of geothermal energy where they drill a hole, they install piping, and then they pump. I'm not too sure if it's water or if it's something else, but they pump a liquid down there. Um, no, I think it's water. Yeah, they pump a liquid down there. Um, the liquid heats up, it produces steam, it comes back up, they collect the steam, and then again the steam spins a turbine and then generates electricity. Again, also very scalable. So also geothermal energy, it requires upfront construction costs, but they're fairly low and it doesn't really produce that much waste. Like once it's built, unlike solar panels or wind panels, like it does need its maintenance, but it doesn't really cost all that much because the lifespan of these installations, they run into the decades, you know. And I don't mean 20 or 30 years. I mean like they can run for hundreds of years, probably. You know, like you'd probably end up replacing some of the piping or whatnot, but it's not that much maintenance you really need. Turbines are super efficient, which makes them really a really good way of generating energy. Steam and turbines. Really, everything's still steam at the end of the day. If you think about it, even nuclear. So humans haven't evolved past steam. Steam is still our main energy source, which is funny to think about. Maybe I should do a video about how people think they're also smart, but all our machines really run on some form of steam or burning fossil fuels still. So geothermal, no high maintenance. The Earth's core cannot be cold. Um, I had an idiot tell me that we can't use geothermal energy because by pumping liquids into the Earth can cool. Um, I shit you not. Someone actually told me that the Earth's core can be cooled. You can actually not cool the Earth's core by pumping liquid into it. Number one, you cannot dig down deep enough to reach the Earth's core. That's your first problem. Your equipment's going to melt long before you even dream of reaching it still. Number two, even if you pump liquid into the Earth's crust, the convection of the moon, so the pushing and pulling effect of the moon onto Earth, makes sure that the core of the Earth is actually swirling around. It's being pushed and it's being pulled by the moon. And this pushing and pulling is actually one of the things that's generating our magnetic field, but it's also the reason why it's hot. Also, it's very clean, no CO2 emissions with geothermal power plants, and it's disaster proof. Aside from being disaster proof, I really like it. It's pretty dope. It's clean and it's really safe, let's say, in comparison to nuclear, because a lot of older generation people are super scared of nuclear. Um, and I understand nuclear can be scary, but it really shouldn't be. Just as geothermal energy is probably one of the best ways to go about creating energy in the future. Um, Obviously, my favorite, my baby, not my brainchild, but I love nuclear energy. So one of the things that makes nuclear energy really great, it is the most reliable form of energy generation. And I sincerely mean that. What that entails is nuclear energy can produce the most power by far out of any other energy form. It is very compact. It has high upfront production costs, generally due to it being really expensive to build nuclear power plants. But once in operation, um, they practically cost nothing, and they can produce tons and tons of power uh, without really costing more or less. They're scalable. You can scale a nuclear energy facility. You can decide if you want to turn it up or turn it down, if you want to make more energy or less, because the energy isn't being made by the fuel rods being inserted. The fuel rods, they're always sort of working. The thing that's making energy in a nuclear power plant is, are you actually using it to turn water into steam and then powering turbines? Because again, nuclear energy is just steam. It's advanced steam for nerds is probably a better way to think about it. And modern nuclear energy plants, unlike older style, um, there are just so many safety features because nerds, kind of people like me who love to think about like all the theoretical scenarios where a nuclear facility can, go wrong. And they're just designed in such a way that even if operated by an idiot, that thing would still, like do an automatic shutdown, probably in the safest, most boringest fashion ever, because nuclear disasters like Chernobyl and Fukushima are like, well, technically Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, because Fukushima was a natural disaster that caused problems to arise with the nuclear facility. But the nuclear facility itself is actually really good. It's just that the Japanese put it in the wrong place. They should have put it way higher up and somewhere where it's way safer. But the Japanese are kind of notoriously bad at doing things like this because, I don't know, for some reason they seem to have a problem with understanding where to build certain things. But, you know, that's on them, really. Shame on you, Japan. Thank you for Samurai, though. Chernobyl was an actual design flaw in the reactor itself, where the Soviets were thinking they could make no mistakes in the designs of nuclear reactors, meaning that the development of nuclear reactor design became kind of hush hush, especially because no mistakes could be made by the Soviet Union, if that makes sense, in the construction of nuclear power designs. So they weren't really innovating their faulty plants, and they were running all sorts of experiments on them, like, hey, would it be safe if we did X, Y, Z? And no, it would not be safe if you do X, Y, Z with a nuclear facility. That's not the design to do these things at all. Which is generally why modern nuclear power plants are quite boring. There are some educational nuclear power plants where they might do the occasional stupid thing, but even they're usually so safe, and they're built in ways where um, even if it will go wrong, it wouldn't blow. And if there would be other dangers besides just explosion, usually most nuclear facilities in the modern era are made of reinforced concrete already. So even if it blows, like you're going to need kind of tremendous force because there have probably been calculations done by people way smarter than you or me on like what kind of theoretical explosion one of these facilities would need to be able to take to give, and then they would just make it strong enough so it can't give, and then do their calculations again, and so on and so forth. Um, so nuclear energy, also no CO2 emissions, does not really require high maintenance. Nuclear energy, notable disasters, I mentioned those. Therefore, equally as safe as geothermal energy, in my opinion, again, because it's all just steam at the end of the day. Um, oh, yeah, there was another thing I wanted to mention, the fuel rods. So, nuclear energy does produce waste in the form of spent fuel rods, but they generally are becoming more and more easily recyclable because we're simply getting more interested in the technology. In regards to the waste, at some point there might be some nuclear waste left. Yes, indeed. But there's a variety of ways to store it safely, even for future generations, like burying it really deep in the earth in a place where the plate tectonics will most likely carry it so deep into the earth that its radiation could not reach you, like ever. And if we're really lucky, some lava might take it along into the actual Earth's core and it will be gone. As the Earth's core is probably already a little bit radioactive, as it has some radioactive materials in it. And that doesn't kill you neither. So, yeah. And also, worst case scenario, I heard this guy called Elon Musk, and he's pretty decent at building rockets. So, worst case scenario, we'd all shoot that stuff to the moon. All right, everybody's favorite. Your car runs on it. V8s make noises because of it. And honestly, I'm a big fan of fossil fuels simply as an energy source. Again, I have an interest in these kinds of things. So obviously, you also have an interest in fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels comprise a variety of known fuel sources, such as oil. Um, Oil generally means things like kerosene, petroleum, diesel fuel, um, and the like, um, natural gases, um, which are becoming more and more popular because generally they have a cleaner burn. Also, coal. Coal is also one of the fossil fuels that people often forget, and it's one of the most polluting ones, and it's still one of the most used ones, simply due to the enormous amount of coal available on Earth. When I was young, I thought it would run out because I enjoyed Minecraft, and on the first servers on PlayStation, coal would run out eventually because you would have mined it all. Same with other materials. Um, that's where my fear stemmed from, and now I understand it works a little bit differently. So, really, humanity as a species for the next probably 1,000 years is not really going to run out of coal. Um, and there's also varieties of coal. So, you have charcoal, which is generally made from charred wood, and you have stone coal. I don't know what the English word for it is. It might just be regular coal, but which is actually mined. You know, so fossil fuels are a reliable source of energy. If you know how fuel engine works, we know how a bunch of them work. You turn on the fuel engine. The fuel engine can make things spin. The spinning motion we can use to power things like pulleys, and thereby produce electricity, which is a really reliable and cheap way to produce energy. Because if you think about it, things like generators, like a generator might be like $150, but you can pour fuel in that bitch and generate power. This is why things like generators are popular in sparsely populated regions and also in harsher climates, because the engine itself also generates heat, which is a nice byproduct. Fossil fuels generally operate at efficiencies of between 1 and 30%. So 1 is really inefficient. Most fuel engines are really efficient. So some of them might even be 35 or even 40%. Hell, you might even have some really crazy hyper efficient designs out there that go all the way to 50. But generally speaking, they're between 1 and 30% efficient. and that includes everything from natural gases, coal, petroleum, diesel, kerosene, all of that stuff. Um, I think I forgot there was one that was pretty efficient, but I can't recall right now. So fossil fuels are by far the most polluting fuel sources. I don't think I really need to say more about them. It's generally understood they produce a lot of carbon monoxide when burnt, and also the mining of it itself obviously produces a lot of greenhouse emissions. And also, you get all sorts of nasty carcinogens that just go everywhere simply due to the extraction and the constant burning of them everywhere, which is why cancer rates in the modern era are so high. So, fossil fuels are an extremely resource intensive resource. Pretty self explanatory. The fossil fuel itself is a natural resource. So, by burning literal shit heaps of them year in, year out, obviously it's going to be resource intensive because it costs a lot of resources to both get them, to mine them, everything. So fossil fuels and extracting is a significant factor for global CO2 production. Yep, definitely. And fossil fuels are currently one of the most used products ingrained into our modern society. People forget things like plastic, that's a fuel product. Like a lot of pharmaceuticals actually have some form of fuel products in them. Things like makeup, um, lots of fuel products in there. Cars, electricity generation. A lot of stuff comes in plastic. Even though it's not necessarily a good material to use, you might as well use paper in a lot of cases, which I'm actually a big fan of. So humanity is currently, to a certain extent, dependent on a fuel source destined to ruin our planet. And so far, we only got this one, which is crazy to me. Like, I'm not a super liberal or anything, but I'm more of an economic and also environmental realist. Like, I care about the actual reality as it is, and a lot of liberal people don't understand what solutions to all these problems actually require. Um, some conservative people understand it. Some of them refuse to believe in it because they don't believe in some basic science, I guess. Although it is funny that Donald Trump said one of the most base statements where global warming eventually leads to global cooling, which is true, which is true. So, and the climate getting hotter really shouldn't necessarily worry people all that much. Yeah, the sea level might rise, but what do you care? We have plenty of land. Like, yeah, it's gonna cause massive problems and all that. Yeah, true, true, true. But there will still be land and places we can live when it's hot and there's more water. And I'd even argue more water will probably, help us get more green because there would be more water. Think about that. That means more rain, more storms, more water coming back on land and becoming sweet water. Um, Whereas once gets cold, all the sweet water freezes, and we rely on flowing sweet water for our survival. Not just as humanity as a species, but all species. That includes plant and animal. Oh, oops. So batteries. Battery is a container generally used to store electrical energy, or it's some form of mechanism, usually involving acidic liquids and certain types of metal in order to generate a small electrical current. Battery technology is currently still in its infancy and is the cause of a lot of ground pollution due to materials being too expensive to recycle, and also because it's just much easier to dump than actually recycle and just make new ones for larger companies. So it's one of the reasons why I'm kind of like iffy about battery technology, and I don't think it's going to be like the thing that saves us all. So why I made sort of a video with kind of a clickbaity misnomer title, because I feel like the title is kind of a misnomer, because I'm not necessarily against the green policy. But what I do think, if you actually want to go forward as a government, the current green policy is a big issue. And that is because governments, instead of being smart and thrifty with their money and able to lower the living expenses of their citizens by using more advanced energy forms like nuclear, like geothermal, maybe a little bit of wind here and there, and some solar where it's necessary. But solar and wind should not be the primary tools that we invest in for the future. For a long term strategy, due to solar and wind only being scalable to a certain extent, and there is a limit to what you can do with solar and wind, in my opinion, it would be much wiser if governments had invested their money in geothermal and nuclear. Both geothermal and nuclear are, well, less so geothermal. Geothermal is really cheap, so therefore it should definitely be one of the things that governments invest in. Same with hydropower. Actually, I forgot to mention that one. I should have made a tab for that one as well. Um, so government should have invested way more in hydropower, geothermal power, and nuclear power. I also really like hydropower. Come to think of it, again, because it's just water moving turbines, no steam. We're going back to the basics with that one, just the water itself. But nuclear is a thing that, in my opinion, could really have us make all the climate goals, lower the price of energy to the point like the lowering of, like, people can't imagine the cost reduction nuclear energy would give us. Like, energy would become so cheap for us that we would be like, the amount of excess money people would have left simply because the price of energy would be so low. Like, you wouldn't need fuel to power your car. You could like use ethanol or electricity outright, or even hydrogen, and then it would probably become so much cheaper, like everything that requires energy. Like, you cannot imagine how much people would start to regain faith in government institutions if governments would have actually invested more in geothermal, hydropower, and nuclear. Because in the beginning it will be a little bit more expensive, but then after a couple of decades, when the power stations have been running for a really long time, is when they really start making back the investments, and at that point energy becomes essentially free, pretty much. It's kind of what happened in France. This is why it has one of the lowest energy prices in Europe. Whereas if you compare it with Germany, I think the price of electricity in France is like 25 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas in Germany it's like 45 or 50. All right. So in conclusion, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked the new format of the video design. I'm trying to do something different with this, but I enjoy doing it. If you have made it this far, thank you for watching, not watching. And then if you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment. If you agree, if you disagree, if I suck, whatever, I don't care. Just leave one. Um, I'm also thinking about starting a Discord to talk about these topics. I don't know if there's anyone that's interested in these topics, but it will be kind of nice to see what other people think about these things in general, and maybe make a video about it. All right. I wish you all a nice day, and I'll see you next time.